The room fell silent. A bride-to-be burst into laughter, pointing at the simple ring her black groom held out. Her friends whispered, smirking, treating him like a joke. To them, he was nothing more than a poor man with a cheap dream. But what they didn't know was that in just minutes, the tables would turn. The ring they mocked was only the beginning of a story that would leave them speechless. Tell us in the comments, what would you do in his place? Before we begin, hit subscribe. It's appreciated. It started like any fairy tale. Michael was a quiet, hard-working man who had spent years saving every spare dollar. Born into a family that had little, he knew the value of every coin he tucked away. His dream wasn't flashy cars or expensive suits. It was love, commitment, and building something lasting. And when he met Claire, a woman whose smile could light up a room, he believed his patience had finally been rewarded. Michael wasn't rich. He worked long hours at a construction site, often coming home with calloused hands and aching muscles. But despite the exhaustion, he carried a quiet pride, the pride of knowing he was building an honest future. To him, the perfect symbol of his love didn't need to come from a jewelry store. It just needed to carry meaning. That's why he carefully chose a ring he could afford, one that represented sacrifice and sincerity, not wealth. Claire, on the other hand, grew up in a world far different from Michael's, surrounded by elegance, luxury, and people who measured worth by possessions. She was accustomed to more than Michael could offer. Her friends often whispered, wondering why she settled for someone like him when she could have had someone with more status, more money, more of everything. Michael heard the whispers, but he brushed them aside, believing love was stronger than judgment. And so, with his heart full and his hands trembling, Michael prepared for the moment he had dreamed of. A proposal. He envisioned her joy, the tears in her eyes, the embrace that would seal their future. But what he didn't know was that the ring he held, so carefully chosen, so deeply meaningful, would not be seen as a symbol of love. Instead, it would become the spark for the cruelest humiliation he had ever faced. If you were in Michael's place, ready to give everything you had, how would you feel knowing it might not be enough? The evening unfolded in a grand hall filled with glittering chandeliers and polished marble floors. Claire's friends had gathered, their designer dresses shimmering under the golden lights. Michael stood at the center, his heart pounding as he reached into his pocket. The ring, modest but chosen with every ounce of love he had, rested in his palm. He knelt down, the room gasping in anticipation. For a brief second, time seemed to stop. Then came the laughter. Claire's eyes widened, but not with joy. Her lips curled, and her friends burst into whispers that cut sharper than any blade. "That's it? That's the ring?" one muttered. Claire giggled, covering her mouth as if to soften the cruelty. But Michael heard every sound. His face burned, his stomach twisted, and for the first time in his life, love felt like shame. The laughter echoed louder than the music. Guests turned their heads, smirks spreading across the room. To them, Michael wasn't a man on one knee, he was a spectacle. An outsider. A poor black man daring to dream beyond his place. Claire's smirk wasn't just about the ring. It was about everything he wasn't. Wealthy, powerful, accepted in her world. Michael's chest tightened as he stood, the ring still trembling in his hand. Every step he had taken in life, every hour of sweat, every sacrifice, seemed to collapse into this single, humiliating moment. He had believed love was blind, but now he saw clearly. To them, it had eyes, and those eyes were fixed on wealth, status, and skin color. And yet something inside him refused to break. Pain simmered, but beneath it burned a fire. He knew what they didn't. The nights he had spent quietly working on something bigger, something no one in that room could imagine. Claire thought she had stripped him of dignity, but she had only lit the fuse. Because what they didn't know was that Michael's story was far from over, and the man they mocked tonight would be the same man they envied tomorrow. Would you have walked away in silence, or would you have stayed to prove every one of them wrong? The air in the hall was heavy, but Michael carried the weight with steady steps. His chest burned, his palms still clutching the small ring box, but his eyes had changed. What began as heartbreak was now steel. The smirks around him only fueled it. They thought they had broken him, but they had just written the first line of his triumph. For months, no, years, Michael had been quietly building something that no one in Claire's circle cared to notice. At night, after long shifts on the construction site, he studied real estate, investments, architecture. He wasn't just laying bricks for someone else's dream. He was laying the foundation for his own. The hands they laughed at, the ones calloused and rough, were the same hands that signed papers most men in that hall couldn't even read. The humiliation of that night cut deep, but it gave Michael clarity. Claire didn't see a partner. She saw a status symbol. And her friends? They never saw him at all, but he would make them see. He poured himself into work with a relentless fire, doubling down on projects, saving, buying, and flipping properties one after another. What they thought was a poor man's ring was actually a man's promise to himself that he would never again be laughed at for what he lacked. Weeks later, Claire bragged to her friends about moving on, chasing someone more fitting. Yet behind her laughter, life was changing. Because as she sipped champagne and mocked his name, Michael signed the deed to something she had once dreamed of, a sprawling estate known in town as the Castle. It was the same property she had once gushed over, the one she said she'd marry anyone who could give it to her. And when the news spread that the same man she humiliated now owned that castle, the whispers turned to stunned silence. The very room that once laughed at him now buzzed with disbelief. Michael didn't need revenge in words. His success spoke louder than anything he could ever say. But here's the question. When life pushes you down, do you let it define you, or do you rise so high they can never look down on you again? The night of humiliation had ended, but its memory lingered like a scar on Michael's heart. Yet scars, he realized, are not just marks of pain. They are proof of survival. Owning the castle wasn't just about wealth or pride. It was about reclaiming dignity, rewriting the story others tried to write for him. When Claire saw the news, her laughter vanished. The same man she mocked for his cheap ring now held the keys to her lifelong dream. Neighbors whispered. Friends who once sneered now spoke his name with awe. But Michael didn't gloat. He didn't need to. His victory was quiet, dignified, and undeniable. In that silence, a truth emerged. Sometimes the most powerful revenge isn't loud. It's the life you build after others doubted you. Michael had shown that strength isn't measured by possessions flaunted in a room, but by perseverance in the shadows when no one is watching. And as he stood on the balcony of his new home, looking over acres of land that now belonged to him, Michael felt something greater than pride. He felt freedom. The kind of freedom no insult, no laughter, no prejudice could ever take away again. But this story is bigger than Michael and Claire. It's about every person who has been underestimated, mocked, or dismissed because of where they come from or the color of their skin. It's about rising above cruelty with unshakable resolve. So the question is, how many more Michaels must be laughed at before the world learns that dignity cannot be measured in gold? Show some love with a like and subscribe to stay inspired.